Okay, guys, welcome. Welcome to our lecture today. This is Professor Erin Wright. Professor Erin Wright teaches graphic design at UAB. That's University of Alabama, Birmingham. Go Dragons? Is it Dragons?
Blazers, close. They have a
Blazers. They do have a dragon. Okay, go Dragons or Blazers. He earned his BFA from Colorado State and his MFA from University of Arizona. Erin has participated in more than 90 international exhibitions in 22 countries. His posters are in several collections, including the J. Paul Getty Museum, the 4th Block International Triennial of Eco Posters in Kharkiv, Ukraine, and the International Poster at Colorado State University. He is the co-founder of Posters Without Borders, a biennial international invitational poster exhibition. And that exhibition has actually been here several times, like 2 times, I think it's been here 2 times. And today is Erin himself to present his posters, and the show that we're gonna open at 5 o'clock today are also all Erin's posters. So please welcome Erin. And he's gonna take it away. Do you want me to hit the lights?
Yes, please. Thanks. As Pavel mentioned, I did my studies at Colorado State University, and that is actually kind of where this started. First, let me get past this. This is a presentation I did in Lima, Peru about 3 years ago, and so I modified it for this, but I'm doing another presentation in Mexico City in literally a week and a half, and that's why there's some Spanish here. So but I figured I would just modify that. Yeah, exactly. So let's get past this. Here's just a picture of my studio. Here's another picture of my studio from another direction. It's just like you would expect, a mess. And here are some of the posters. As I mentioned before, I went to Colorado State University, and at that time, they began the Colorado International Invitational Poster Exhibition. This is in 1979. And at the time, it was one of the top 3 poster shows in the world because there had not been any other poster exhibitions in the United States. And it still is one of the most recognized poster exhibitions in the world. They just had their 22nd version opened last month. But when I was a student there, I went there as a student to be a graphic designer. I wasn't really quite sure what that meant, but I did find out pretty quickly that a lot of it had to do with learning how to participate in advertising design and things like that. And frankly, I wasn't really that interested in selling things to people. But I really had this ability in graphic imagery. And I attended this poster show that is the very first one that they ever had, and it literally changed my life. So it's one of those things, not that my poster show is going to change your life, but I think what you have to do is you have to go and attend things and go see these things, and that opportunity to have that, that aha moment, that moment you're like, wow, that's really something. Because at the time I saw these posters, and this is in 1979, this is way before the fall of the Berlin Wall. Communism is still big in Eastern Europe and obviously the Soviet Union states. And we had all these posters from that area here at Colorado State University, and you could tell those posters were not just maybe a poster for Macbeth or Hamlet or an opera for Carmen or something, but they were also these kind of subversive statements against the totalitarian, authoritarian regimes at that time. And the ability of those posters to kind of make these statements just really affected me. I mean, I saw these Polish posters. I don't speak a word of Polish, but I knew what the poster was about. It really struck me. And as I said, that moment changed my life. From that moment on, I wanted to design posters. Didn't happen that easily. There's not a whole lot of people that hire social, political poster artists necessarily. But I did make a good living as a graphic designer and eventually went to grad school and decided to become a professor. And at that point, I was able to really take off doing my own work in social and political poster design. I'm going to show you, I don't do this in a kind of linear way. I kind of pick and choose things. I've got a few that I really want to make sure I talk about, but I'm just going to kind of pick some. I'm going to start off at the beginning though. This is one of the very first posters I had ever created. This was back in 1988. And all of this was done by hand. This is well before we had computers working for us. The first Mac came out in '86. I didn't actually have any use of the Mac until I was teaching at LSU back in the '90s. So this is all done by hand. Here is the production art for it. This is how we did production art back then, where we were using ruby lift or amber lift to tell the printer where the colors were. And there was the base art for it. So, you know, long before we did this stuff on the computer, we actually had to produce the production art to make this stuff work. And, you know, from that point, let's go here. Obviously working with computers a lot now, and it's really been a game changer for me. I can do so many different things that before were a struggle are now fairly simple. I do my design work under the nom de guerre Asylum. And Laura and I had just been, we were first together, we were living in New Orleans, I was teaching at LSU, and I was trying to think of a name of my business. What was I going to do this work under? And the term asylum really appealed to me because it means different things to different people, right? The term asylum to some may indicate a safe haven, right? People who seek asylum are seeking safety. To other people, it may mean a place of lunacy. It's like the lunatic asylum, right? So I like that kind of dichotomy in the term. And so I designed a series of posters. I had a solo show back in, wow, what was that, 2001, I think. And I designed a series of posters on that theme. This was one of them. And it's that idea of, for instance, you know, freedom for the marionette, freedom from the strings, right? Cutting their own strings, but then once they cut the strings, they no longer have the ability to do any kind of movement. So this kind of, you know, there's very few things in life that are all plus and without any minus. Here's another poster from that show. It's harder to see in this room because there's still some light going on, but this says Asylum. It's wrapped around this light bulb. This is a X-ray of my wife's skull. Don't ask me how I got it. Let's just say she's a hard sleeper. But again, the idea that ideas are all good, but that's not necessarily the case, right? And this is one of those things that I also work at trying to teach my students to become visually literate, to start going out into the world and looking for similarities, right? What are the similarities in things? Seeing a light bulb and seeing a skull there, or seeing a skull and seeing a light bulb, right? These things that you can maybe then eventually in your own work combine together. Let's go here. Going to get out. Let me jump over here. This is a poster I did about 10, 15 years ago for a show that was in Tokyo. And again, I'm trying to work with these kinds of different ideas. One image that could mean different things. And so I did this poster for liberty. But if you turn it upside down, it says tyranny, right? And the image changes and the content changes and the context changes for you. So this idea of working with multiple ideas and trying to push the viewer to look deeper in this. Let's get here. This is a poster I did a few years ago about Guantanamo, the detainees that they had there that were literally, we captured these people and put them in prison and never gave them at least the right to a free trial. And, you know, I'm a social and political poster artist, so I have very strong feelings about things, and I'm perfectly fine with my viewers also having strong feelings that may be counter to that. I think that's great. We can have discussions about things. For me, you know, if you believe in liberty, if you believe a person should have the right to a free trial, you shouldn't believe that that only applies to Americans, right? It should apply to everyone, if that is truly your belief, that someone should have the right to a free trial. And these prisoners didn't. So the idea of closing Guantanamo Bay prison, and I was working with that, and I wanted to do something with the type. I have been exploring, and you'll see this in a lot of my posters, I like to play with the type. Very rarely will you see any type straight out of the computer that I do, especially if it's the main type. A lot of times the extra text will be something that is closer to straight out of the computer, but even that I will go in and really work with. But this idea of trying to see if I could make the type out of the concertina wire and the barbed wire there was a challenge for me. And I created that in Illustrator so that I could literally, I can sign my name in concertina wire now if I want to. Let me get back and we can look at this one. And you can see that I will also start to use the elements that I've created in other posters. I made them, and it seems like I should be able to use them in different ways and different kinds of posters. This one is for Dia de los Muertos. I go to Mexico about every other year. There's one of the major biennials is down there. It's the Bienal de Cartel in Mexico. And I apologize to those Spanish speakers in the audience because I will butcher that language. But here is another skull. It's not my wife's this time. I met a medical intern at the park where we walk our dog. And I mentioned that I was interested in getting some x-rays to work with, and he brought these x-rays. They don't have any identifying characteristics. I didn't know whose x-rays they were or anything like that. They were just junk x-rays that they had that I was able to use. And again, you can see how I wanted to create my own type with that. And I did that and then brought that type back in and applied it to the poster here. Let's go to this one. I create posters in lots of different ways, whether I'm drawing, whether I'm creating illustrations in Illustrator, or manipulating photographs, things like that. I was invited to participate in a show in Taiwan, and the theme of the show was love and peace. And so I thought, well, I had this idea, I will do that traditional peace sign from the 1960s. Well, I may be the only one in here old enough to remember that, but, you know, peace. And then I would draw in there, in the peace sign, the heart for love. And then all of the text was, again, my handwritten text. A lot of that, the top part of this poster is missing, but there's text up there as well. And I was doing this poster, I was working on this concept when I was down in Mexico doing a workshop. And so I thought, well, my hand, I do that with my hand. Let's get other people's hands in there. So I got people from my workshop to draw their own hearts and lay on the floor, and I was going to come up over the top and take this photograph that I was going to use. So they drew these hearts. I had one of the other members of the workshop did this type, and then I was not going to have anything to do with it other than kind of photoshopping it and cropping it. So it was my poster that was created by other people in this way. But when I got to where I was going to crop it, because I was going to crop it right in here, I got to looking at the photograph more closely, and I just loved the expressions on these students. This student's looking into the area. These two students are covering or hiding their eyes. This student, she looks like a cherub off of Botticelli painting, right? And this student looking in, I Photoshop colored the heart and did a little bit of manipulation with the type and moved it in there. But you know, sometimes you think you know what you want until you get in there and start working with it. And I tell my own students, like, be careful about having such a direct line to your idea. Be careful about saying, okay, here I am. And then it's almost like going for a drive and not noticing any of the scenery as you're going someplace, just having the destination as a goal and not the experience of that. Does that make sense? So I encourage my students, and I encourage you, if you are an artist, that you know, not just stop and smell the roses, but notice the roses as you're going by. The first assignment I give to beginning students on the first day of class is to take a different way home. They're like, what? And I tell them the story. When my daughter was little, and she would be sitting in the back in her car seat, we would always take a different way. If we were going to the grocery store, if we were going to church, if we were going to school, going to work, we always went a different way. And she got to really know the town pretty well. She can find her way around really well. But we had this saying. I'd say, why do we go different ways? And she'd be in the back and she'd say, so we can see different things, right? Just the act of going a different way sets you on a course of paying attention to the things that are around you. How many of you have ever gotten home and not realized that how you got home, and without, you know, major maybe substance influence or whatever, but you get home and it's like, I don't even remember that drive. I don't remember that happening. This is a way of opening your eyes. When you open your eyes, then you start to see things, and those things then you can start to incorporate in your art. Let me see. Let's go here. Here's an exhibition in Taiwan. Here are the posters. This poster actually, not mine, but the one I did with the students, actually, some people were publishing a book on poster design, and they asked me if they could use this poster in their book. Okay, let's go to, I got several here that I wanted to make sure that I talked about. One Earth. This is actually, I may have mentioned I'm going to Mexico here in a week and a half. There's a major Biennial down there. They've asked me to do a workshop. It's a competition, a poster competition, and this poster was selected to be in the exhibition. Typically, these poster competitions get about 10,000 entries to the poster competition, of which they select about 300 to 400 to be in the exhibition itself. 300 or 400 sounds like a lot, but think of that out of 10,000 entries. The Peru one that I was in had 15,000 entries in it. 15,000 entries. And part of that is because the nature of the digital realm now, it's really simple to send in entries and things like that. But this is one that got into that show, and this is a poster that I had actually designed for another exhibition, another competition, and it was not selected. And then the Mexico show came around. They had a category that had to do with something that I thought this would be appropriate, so I redesigned the poster using many of the main elements, and it got into that poster show. And that's another kind of lesson too, you know, that these things are subjective to a certain extent. I am a professor, and so I always have that, you know, the student says, well, it's all subjective, how can you give me a grade? Well, I've been doing this for 30 plus years. I've got a pretty good idea what's good and what's not. But there is always another opinion. There is always another audience. And maybe who you're showing your work to, that may not necessarily be that the work isn't strong, but it maybe it's the wrong audience. So you don't know unless you get your work out there. I tell my students that being a graphic designer is a little bit like being an exhibitionist. You're constantly walking around going, hey, what do you think, right? And you're gonna get some people that are gonna say, I've seen better. You're gonna get some people that say, wow, you know. But you have to put your work out there. You have to do that if you're going to get a response. Let's go back here. This is a poster show. This is a poster I did 20 years ago, I think. And it was after some terrorist attack, and I can't even remember what that attack was at this time. But, you know, I had created these almost cartoon-like response to violence, you know, sticking the finger in. It's a little Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd type of thing, where Elmer's got the rifle and Bugs sticks his finger in there, you know. But I created these illustrations here, and then you'll see that I use that illustration again. I just, you know, plagiarize myself, if you will, right? This was for an exhibition in Korea where they were marking the 100th anniversary of their independence movement from Japan. At the time they were under Japan's rule. They had an independence movement that secured their independence from Japan. And so they've got the Japanese rising sun from their flag there, and then I'm going to pronounce this wrong for those of you that speak Korean, the taguk, which is the kind of yin-yang symbol from the Korean flag that I put there, and this idea of independence. But I just, you know, I just stole my own hand and scissors thing and modified it just a little bit to make it work with this poster here. Let's see. Like I said, I do a lot of social and political posters. This one, a friend of mine, his name's Santiago Pol. He's a very famous Venezuelan graphic designer and poster artist. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, Venezuela was going through a crisis in their government. They had a president who was trying to change the constitution to basically ensure that he would remain in power for life. And so there was protests on the street from the people. The president sent out literally jackbooted thugs to go and put down the protests in a very violent way. Well, this really critical vote was coming up, and Santiago asked me and several other designers to create posters that the people could carry in the streets. It's like, well, how do you resist, you know, an army and a militarized police force when all you've got are posters, you know? But I thought, you know, I've got to try to think of a visual way of saying how you can resist. And that's what that says in Spanish, is resist. And it's that old, again, almost comic book-like thing where you tie the person's shoelaces together and they can't proceed, right? And sent that off to Santiago for the protests. Let me go. And that leads me to this poster. Again, I'm showing you all this Spanish stuff. I really don't speak any Spanish, but I was doing a workshop a number of years ago in Mexico, and typically these workshops will get 20 to 25 students in there, and they come from all over the country because this is a major deal to have, because they have international artists that come and teach these workshops during the Biennale. And I was teaching this workshop and there was 2 people in it. 2 people. I was like, okay, am I just that unpopular? It's not beyond comprehension that that's the way of it, but I asked them and they told me this horrific story. Literally about a month before that, all these students travel to wherever the Biennale is going to be, and at this time it was in, I want to say Puebla, but that's not correct. But it was, they travel there by bus to get to wherever the Biennale is and attend the workshops. Literally a month before that, there were 43 students from a teacher's college who had commandeered a bus to go protest at a speech being given by a local governor's wife because they were protesting her policies and things in his policies. Problem was that this governor's wife had a connection to the drug cartels. And so they commandeered the bus, they were driving to the protest, the bus got pulled over by the police, and the police handed the students over to the drug cartel, and they were never heard from again. Disappeared off the face of the earth. And that's why when we had the Biennale a month later, like, people were living in fear. They didn't even want to get on a bus to go anywhere. But there became this uprising, all this protest that came because of the government's complicity in the kidnapping and murder of these 43 students. And so one of my students that's in the workshop told me the story, and after the workshop was over and I was back in the US, he contacted me and told me that there were major protests that were going to be happening all over Mexico on the same day to protest this. And the government and their response to it, and said that there was a website and they were gathering posters like Santiago was for people to carry in the protests. And so I created this poster for that, and it says, basically it says, by silencing 43, they gave voice to thousands. And this just says demand justice, and this is the name of the area where the students were from when they were kidnapped. I think it's a camellia, is a very popular flower in Mexico. You'll see it a lot of times in Day of the Dead types of altar pieces and things like that. And so for the vase for the camellia, I use this megaphone there for the protest. Sent it off to the website, thought nothing of it. Then the students started to contact me and show me pictures of my poster being carried in protests all over Mexico. These are all from different cities. And even on like a major, this is a journal in San Luis there. And I'm glad to see my posters in galleries. I love to see the poster in the gallery, but the poster is it's the art of the people. Does that make sense? I mean, it's meant to be on the street. It's meant to be out there communicating with the public. And so this really just, it made me feel great to see this poster being used in that way. Let me know if I talk too long. They're like, okay, shut up. Just kidding. This one, and it's showing a lot of stuff from Mexico, but this was, I was invited, because of my connections in Mexico, I get invited to a lot of these things, but there's a game in Mexico that's called La Loteria, which is maybe some of you are familiar with it. It's like bingo. It's like one of the national games of Mexico. Every family has a La Loteria card deck, that they have played for generations. And this is the traditional La Loteria, some of them. There's about 50 some cards in the entire deck, maybe 51, that may be the last one. But this organizer in Mexico asked individual designers from all over the world, and they gave them each a card to redesign. And I was given number 49, El Pino. And so that's what the traditional card looks like. But I wanted to reimagine it, not just do a picture of a pine tree. So I imagined it as a pine tree air freshener, right? In the car, and number 49 that's the Mexican road sign for their interstate, if you will. So just trying to reimagine things. You might also notice that my name, Asylum, I stick in almost every poster that I do. It shows up in my posters. Oftentimes much more hidden than this is. The only times I really don't put it into my posters are if it's a competition and they specifically say that you can't have anything that is an identifying mark of the creator, right? That will show who did this. And I had a little bit more fun with this by putting a T-Rex chasing the car in the background there. That show is actually going to be at the B&L too. They're going to do that exhibition at the B&L here in a week and a half. This is one I did for a show that was called Rethink, Redesign, Recycle. And I found this information about, the production of water bottles uses actually 17 million barrels of oil per year. Oftentimes we don't really think of the impact of a bottle and its recycling, but we don't really think about the fact that it's also creating pollution in other ways, just in its production there. And so created that, and I've created a lot of different kinds of posters about ecological themes. And here's the same kind of information and using a bottle, but now what I've done is actually went out into the parking lot of my studio and just got some chalk and drew this world and drew a little gun there on the bottle, using the bottle as the barrel of the gun there. So there's lots of different ways to approach this common or similar kinds of themes with that. Let's go to this one. I did not create this poster, but I was invited to do a poster for an exhibition in Athens, Greece, about legalizing medical marijuana. So that's the theme of the poster exhibition. And this is even before my time, but back in the 40s, there were a series of movies that came out along this idea of marijuana and how it was, going to drive us all on a bus to hell, straight to hell. So it came out, there's a whole bunch of these posters, a bunch of these movies, and the most famous one was called Reefer Madness, right? Public enemy number one, women cry for it, men will die for it. Actually, it sounds pretty, it's like, I don't know if they're trying to make this a negative thing, but it sounds pretty, rawr. So here's another one, the burning question. Dope created ecstasy avalanching into frightful perversions. Wow. So I would go see that movie, right? Makes beasts of men and women. So there's this whole series of these films that came out, and I'm doing a poster on medical marijuana. So I decided to do my own Reefer Madness movie poster. And recreated a similar style right down to putting it onto old newsprint paper that was ripped and folded and everything like that, like those original movie posters were. But I took this text directly from these posters, the truth about marijuana. But I put in added text is that it's not the smoke of hell, or it's not public enemy #1, or criminalizing medical reefer is madness for that. And so there's that text, and you can see how I added some extra text to kind of change the theme of this. And there's the Asylum. ASYLUM, down there in the hair of that. This is a poster I did for an exhibition in Tehran. I was invited to participate in actually is a larger art exhibition that had a poster exhibition within it, but it's called the Art for Peace Festival, which is, I think, really interesting too, because, when I was growing up, the Soviet Union was the big demon in the world. And so, we were literally taught to hate the Russians. You know what? I know a few Russians, and they're really nice people. Same thing, some of my closest friends are Iranian, and now they are protesting their government and that response there. But this idea that in Iran they have an Art for Peace festival. They invited me for this, and the theme of this poster show was No Child Left Behind. And a lot of times, because these aren't necessarily American or even English types of poster subjects, I'm kind of left to interpret it on my own. And so I came up with the idea of, children that are being left alone on the internet, to kind of put your kid in front of a screen and let the screen be the babysitter. And yeah, it's like it's a candy store of things out there. But, there are also dangerous things out there that look like the candy, but they're not. So this idea there, and this is that same thing about looking for similarities in things, right? What's the same thing about a lollipop and a coiled up snake? Hang on, let me get through this. Am I going too long? Okay. This one was for, and actually Pavel has had several of the Posters Without Borders shows here. I co-organized that. One year we were doing it on the right to vote. And again, we send these things out to international designers. It's an invitational. And so we're getting perspective from a group of people, and it's not just Americans that are doing these things or are concerned about them. We invite people, but we also design posters ourselves. And so I was working on an idea about the right to vote. And this is a poster back from, I think, 2015. So this is before any of the, voting issue was an issue. And I thought, well, what if I type the word ballot on a piece of paper and run it through a paper shredder, kind of like a ballot box, right? The same kind of idea. You're putting a ballot into a slot. You do that with paper shredder. And here's the illustration I did for that. The "Where is my vote?" and it's going through the paper shredder there. Other posters that I've done for Posters Without Borders. This is a poster about action, reaction, interaction, in which we were asking the designers to work with how the individual can impact society. And so I took this line from a Peter Gabriel song about Stephen Biko. Stephen Biko was a contemporary of Nelson Mandela. They were both fighting the apartheid in South Africa. Stephen Biko was protesting. They took him to a police jail cell, and he mysteriously died. Right, mysteriously died. Anyway, Peter Gabriel wrote this song about Biko, and it has a line that says, "You can blow out a candle, but you can't blow out a fire." And the next verse says basically that the wind will only kick it up higher, right? And so I wanted to create that idea that together we can change the world. And I did a series of lino cuts. Each of those candles is its own separate lino cut. Then I brought it into the computer. And even the type, all of that type was produced using metal type. I would literally get us ink pad and stamp each letter out. Again, part of it is because I don't want type straight out of the computer. It's almost soulless in a way, right? I want to be the master of this. I want to create the type myself with that. And so I had some metal type, and I literally stamped out each one of those things. Let's go here. Talking about contemporary issues. I did this poster back in 2014 when Russia invaded the Crimea. You know, the Russian nesting doll, but instead of, you know, some child's toy, instead you get a grenade. And you would think that, you know, that was 2014, we would be not having to deal with that now, but we are, obviously. And there's the word asylum. It's actually printed on the grenade there. All right. I've done a lot of peace posters. Matter of fact, you'll see a bunch of things that have to do with peace. And with this poster, this was for a show in Korea. And they asked the designers to create a poster about peace. Well, okay. But I'd done a lot of peace symbols, and you know, I didn't want to do a dove, I didn't want to do a peace symbol, I didn't want to even do, you know, the hand thing again. I thought, how can I think about peace in a different way? How can I have it in a way that people won't just walk by the poster and go, oh, another dove for peace, yay. You know, how can I make them stop and look at it a little deeper? And so I thought, well, peace, you know, is a lot of it is removing tension and anger and hate. And how can you prevent those things from happening in the first place? So I came up with the idea of trying to represent hate on the inside cover of a matchbook, and then dropping in a glass of water and taking the photo. If the matchbook can't light, right? Hate is already extinguished before it even has a chance. And to do this poster, I really wanted to make have the word peace here. I wanted to work with the reflection and the refraction of that word in the type. So what I actually did is I printed the word peace on the background before I took the photo. Does that make sense? So it wasn't added afterwards. It was actually part of the photo. The word peace is in there. And I really like how you can kind of see it through there and how it's even reversed when you see it at the top up here. But I didn't feel like this said what I wanted it to say, because hate is very clear and peace is very blurry. And that wasn't really quite the message I wanted. So I went ahead and went back to this one, and you can see right there is where the asylum is on it. I actually put it on the back of the reflection of the matchbook there. Let's go back here. This is another show that was in Korea, and they, again, sometimes the translation is a difficult one when they send me English translations of what they're looking for, but this one had to do with revolution. And I decided again to play with it and the idea of not just revolution, but evolution, right? And so I live in Birmingham, Alabama, which is home of the civil rights movement. Fabulous civil rights museum there. If you ever get a chance to go to Birmingham, you should check it out. And so I thought, well, what if I work with blindfolds and gags, and she's releasing his blindfolds so he can see her, and he's releasing her gag so he can hear her, right? This idea of how can we evolve our relationship with that. And because I wanted to stick with just black and white on this poster, I used just texture on the word so that I could make the R darker and make it gray, but it is technically still, if you zoom in and look at it, it's still black and white. It's just made with texture there. There's where the asylum is. Down there, it's in her braid there. Let's go.
I think we can do one more.
Okay, one more? All right. Let's go.
The show now and look for Asylum.
You'll have to go look. Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, I have to show this one.
Yes, you do. Yes.
This is actually, I was invited to participate in a show called We Are Superheroes. That's the title, international poster exhibition. It was showing concurrently in Indonesia and in Poland. And this is actually, I came down here for the show that Pavel had organized about COVID. And so I was thinking of medical professionals, and they are superheroes. And my wife is a medical professional, so I asked her to pose for this, and she thought I was just making a poster about medical professionals, so I took her out. We went in the front yard, and I had her do several poses in her scrubs and such like that, looking off in a heroic figure way off into the sunset. She didn't realize that I was going to make the poster about her. I'm embarrassing the hell out of her right now. That's kind of good. You know, that's always good, right? So Dr. Laura Montgomery Wright and certified nurse anesthetist, registered nurse anesthetist, and superheroes, you know, again, this is one of those things. There are people in Indonesia that are organizing it, and there's like, we are superheroes. But the term superhero here in the States has much more of a Marvel comic book kind of impact, right? We don't think of it, we think of not heroes. Superheroes are people that are genetically different or muscle bound or something like that, as opposed to heroes, people that actually risk their safety and security for the rest of us. And so I shortened that header to hero instead of the we are superheroes. I'm gonna just go to this last one here because this is a poster that I'm working on right now. It has to do with emerging after COVID. You can see my trademark barbed wire, but now I've added little COVID cells to it. And this is a poster that's in process that's going to go to a show in Taiwan next week. Actually, I've already finished it and sent it off, but this is about a week ago and I was still working on it. Gracias.
So now it's time for questions. If you guys have any questions, are we passing this mic around? We were passing this mic around. It's more official that way, plus it records things.
Just shout it out.
Yeah, so if you guys have any questions, this would be a good time to ask some of your questions. Anybody? Yes, go ahead. Hold on, let me give you the mic.
So when it comes to like getting your art out there, can I also apply the same thing for things like theater and music and
You know, I tell my students to show their work to everybody. For one thing, they're getting grades from me, but their work isn't going to be viewed by thousands of art professors. They're going to be seen by public, right? So I would do that regardless. If you and it's funny, and my wife will attest to this, I am really shy. I am actually an introvert, and I would prefer to be in my studio working on posters. But you have to push yourself out there, or at least push your children out there so that they can go out and get recognized in the world. Yes, definitely.
Does anybody else have a question?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment that I thought was really interesting, is that you talked about, excuse me, do I need to stand up too?
No.
Is this thing really working? I don't even think it's on.
It's recording. It's
Okay.
not for this, it's for the future. It's for posterity.
So you talked about doing your stamping of your letters to make them personal, and I thought that was really an interesting thing because type in the computer is impersonal because it's so widespread. And so when you had your Russian doll and the grenade, the writing there was typefaced as though it were impersonal, like the computer. So I thought that was really kind of an interesting thing you did there.
It's a really ironic in a way if you think about it, but there are typefaces called handwriting, you know, and it's exactly the opposite of handwriting in many ways. And I tell students that even if they're going to use those typefaces, then you go back and change certain letters, stretch things, manipulate things so that it looks like it was done by hand, even if it wasn't done by hand. And you know, the type is often the second thought. First they come up with the image, and then they go try to match type to go with it, as opposed to having this kind of holistic approach to, you know, this is how the type should work with this poster. And oftentimes for me the solution is creating my own type. I didn't show it, but there's a poster there called Posters of Troy. I think I can get back to it, maybe not. But for that one, I painted on big index cards, actually it's Bristol plate, but the letters, each letter form, I cut it like a house paint brush and printed or painted each letter form out and scanned that in and put it in there. You know, because everything else felt just didn't have what I wanted it to have. It didn't have the kind of personal nature that I wanted it to have with that. Type is so difficult. How many of you are studying graphic design? Okay, that's fine, that's fine. You know, type is one of the most difficult things for even professional graphic designers to work with. You know, it's like choosing the perfect paint to go with your sofa. You know, you can spend all day doing it and then it's just still not quite right. Sometimes it's better if you, you know, change the sofa, perhaps, I don't know.
I thought whatever you used for the grenade was really brilliant because grenades are impersonal, right?
Yeah.
It's just for anyone.
It is, yeah, it's not even killing somebody, not even walking up and killing that person personally. You're throwing a grenade and it just kills whoever's available at that time. Yeah, you're exactly right there. So much fun talking about killing multiple people, right?
Do you have any general advice for aspiring artists?
Yeah, and actually I'm going to actually riff off Chuck Close. If you don't know who Chuck Close is, he died recently, amazing artist, fantastic. But I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, something to the effect of inspiration is for amateurs. You know, artists get in the studio and work. And I tell my students that you don't wait for ideas to come to you, you work towards them. I show my students my own sketchbooks, and when I first came to Birmingham to join my wife after she finished her graduate degree, I was working at a children's museum, and I was developing signage and logo types for all the different areas in the children's museum. And I literally have sketchbooks that thick of these things, pages upon pages. My students come up to me with a page and it's like, okay, give me the approval so I can move forward. And you know, in one way, they're trying to get me to approve it so that they can take the shortcut to the destination. What was the first thing I said? It's not about the destination, right? It's not about the destination. Spend all that time building up these ideas, and you'll be surprised how much better they'll be. I now and then will revisit some of my old poster designs, and I always make them better. Always make them better. So my advice to you is continue working and get it out there. You know, there are those arguments of if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around, does it really make a sound kind of thing. Same thing. If you create art but you never put it out there, what is it really? Is it, I guess it is art, but it's not out there for public consumption. And getting ready to retire, it's funny, but the one thing I've learned in the last few years, and I know I can't teach this to you, you have to learn on your own, but is to be fearless. You know, just be fearless. Don't give a rat's, I'm not going to say it, about anybody's opinion. You know, if it's right for you, do it. Make it. You know, there will always be people that will say that your art is bad. But there are going to be some people that are like, wow, your art changed my life. You just got to find that audience, right? But if you don't put it out there, if no audience sees it, then you'll never know. So sorry, I can get on a soapbox and talk forever. That's why Pavel's got a leash there. He can reel me in. But, you know, I used to be really nervous about type. And my wife told me, Laura said, you know, I think that's your strongest thing. You're really good with type. And I was like, what? You know, I've always been nervous about type, about dealing with type. And most graphic designers are. You just got to be fearless. That whole kind of, what is that thing about imposter complex? We all feel that. First time I got in front of a classroom of students to talk to them, I thought, oh my God, it was Emperor Has No Clothes. I thought they're going to realize I'm a fraud. They're going to carry me out of here and dump me in the lake. You know? And that first class I taught, it was back at the University of Arizona, I got to see the reviews, and all of them were positive except one. And one said, Erin should be carried out and dumped in the lake. You know, that's fine. That was that student's opinion, but there were a whole lot of really positive opinions too. Anyway, anybody else?
So you're saying, Erin, sketchbooks are important.
You know, and I am very old school. I'm getting ready to retire, and I was not a digital native like y'all are. I never even interacted with a computer till I was almost 30 years old, right? And back then it was like really basic kinds of software. But I still make my students do sketchbook work because this is kind of a tool. Neville Brody said he used to think of it as a tool, but now he thinks of it as an environment. But this is still, you know, for producing your ideas, not you're creating your ideas. Because believe it or not, for all the bells and whistles and things you do there, I can draw something in my sketchbook a lot faster than I can create it in the computer. And so the whole process of ideation and organization of things can happen in a few pages on a sketchbook, where I see my students, they go to the computer and they sit there and they're working with the tools to try to create something, and it just takes forever. I tell them the sketchbook, think of it like a map, right? The destination is the finished product here. The sketchbook is your map to get to that destination. The better your map, the better able you get to the destination. So my students give me these kind of chicken scratches and they say, what do you think of this idea? It's like, I can't even tell what the hell that is, right? It's not a very clear map. If you continue to work on it, build it, you know, then eventually you've got a really good map and you can get to your destination.
Or even find the thing you weren't looking for and be there already.
Exactly. Well, and that's the thing. Again, one of those things I've learned in 30 years, I have ideas coming to me. It's like drinking out of a fire hose. How many of you feel that way? I know it's difficult. When you're, it sounds counterintuitive, but the younger you are, the harder it is to come up with ideas. But that's because you put a lot of roadblocks in there and you didn't go into the studio and just work towards them. It's like anything. And drawing is one of those things too. A lot of people don't draw in their sketchbooks because they say, oh, I can't draw. You know what I tell people that say I can't draw? I say, you don't draw. Spend time doing it and you'll get better at it. You may never compare to Michelangelo or Pablo Picasso, but you'll get competent at it. I could shoot basketballs from now till doomsday and never be able to do it as well as Michael Jordan or LeBron James, but I'll get pretty damn good at it, right? It's a skill. If you are committed to it and you're committed to being an artist, you know, don't expect immediate success. Go out there and work. If that's your dream, go out there and work. That's the only way it's ever going to come to you. You know, there are those one-hit wonders that pick up a banjo and go out and make a #1 record, but that's their one hit, and then live in that one moment of glory for the rest of their lives. You know, if you want to be a committed working artist, then it requires you to be a committed working artist to do that. So, I know. Get off your pulpit. I'm sorry.
Okay, do we have any more questions? All right, then let him get off his box. Let's give him a hand.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank guys, and at 5 o'clock we will, there will be an opening reception. There will be cheese and crackers and maybe some meat. I don't know. But most importantly, there will be posters, more posters here, and you can talk to Erin about some of his posters. And of course, you can always look for the Asylum side.
Some of them are really hard to find, really hard to find. But now you'll have to really look at my posters.
All right, thank you for coming.